So hello, everyone. I see the number of attendees in our keynote speech is growing. I'm going to wait a little bit before I introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Michael Puett, and then we can get started. At the end of Michael's speech, we're going to have about 10 minutes to ask him some questions. So as he's speaking, get ready to start thinking of things that you may want to ask him, and I'll be facilitating the Q&A until approximately 9:40 Pacific time. Wait just a few more minutes before everyone pops in. Okay, I think we're ready to get started. So for those who don't know me, my name is Victoria Michaels, and I am the director of the Symposium of Rising Scholars at Polygens. It's my pleasure today to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Professor Michael Puett. Professor Puett is the Walter C. Klein Professor of Chinese History and Anthropology at Harvard University. His interests are focused on the interrelations between history, philosophy, anthropology, and religion, with the hope of bringing the study of China into larger historical and comparative frameworks. He is the author of The Ambivalence of Creation, Debates Concerning Innovation and Artifice in Early China, and To Become a God, Cosmology, Sacrifice, and Self-Divinization in Early China, and has co-authored Ritual and Its Consequences, an essay on the limits of sincerity. His most recent book, The Path, What Chinese Philosophy Can Teach Us About the Good Life, co-authored with Christine Gross-Low, is a New York Times and international bestseller and has been published in 27 territories. Professor Puett is the recipient of a Harvard College Professorship for Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching, the Starr Family Prize for Excellence in Advising, the Joseph R. Levinson Memorial Teaching Prize, and the Everett Mendelsohn Excellence in Mentoring Award. Since 2012, his course on classical ethical Chinese political theory has been the third most enrolled undergraduate course at Harvard. We are so delighted to have Professor Puett with us today to talk about his research journey and lessons from Chinese philosophy that we can all take with us. So please join me in welcoming Professor Puett. I'll now turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Victoria, for the much too nice introduction, but deeply appreciated. Thank you for inviting me to be here today, and my deep thanks to all of you. I've been listening to several presentations by you. These presentations have been extraordinary, just incredibly inspiring, and I very much look forward to the many hours to go where I will hear, hopefully, as many of the possible presentations as I possibly can, jumping from session to session. So what I will be speaking about today is indeed, as Victoria mentioned, ways of thinking about how to develop a research path. Most explicitly, in terms of what you're already beginning to do, which is finding the things you absolutely love to research and how to do that effectively, but it will continue. So all that you are doing now is obviously part of a much larger journey that you'll be embarking on as you try to find where these current projects will develop, how they will take you in terms of a future, what sorts of things you would like to be doing in the years to come, leading to what sorts of colleges and universities you might decide to apply to, what you will decide to major in, and future careers, etc. So I will begin relatively small about the research path, but it will open up toward kind of everything. Now, that might seem like a lot to talk about in a brief amount of time, but actually it's not, because what I would like to talk about is common ways we tend to think about all that I just mentioned. In other words, how do we tend to think about how I would find things that would excite me and how I would go on beginning and continuing successfully on these journeys, broadly speaking, and what are the good parts of these assumptions. There's certainly many, but I'm also going to point out some of the dangers, even limitations, even traps that this way of thinking can lead to. And drawing from an area of interest to mine, namely Chinese philosophy, I'll be introducing some possible other ways of thinking that will not contradict what I'll begin with, but add to them and give hopefully some depth and nuance. So let me just begin with those common assumptions. And again, I won't be saying these are wrong. I'm just going to be saying there are pitfalls to be aware of. So let's think of the common terms that we will often use if we are thinking about ways to go about this journey. So here are things we'll often say, and I say these too in recommendations to students I'm working with. Look within. Find yourself. Find what makes you tick as an individual. Find your passions. What excites you? What big ideas make you want to wake up in the morning and work through? Choose a research path that allows you to work on those passions. What excites you that you want to understand, you want to change the world through, you want to do great things through. You're looking within and finding those things that make you tick at your best, most excited form. And once you find those, our argument tends to be, love them, embrace them, right? It's you. Once you find what makes you tick, your passions, love yourself, embrace yourself for who you are, what your passions are, and by all means, therefore, stick to them, right? I mean, don't let anything pull you away from who you really are, what you really love in that future decision, college, university, major, career. That's what you want to be focusing on, being true to yourself, staying with your passions, never wavering from them. Now, all of this obviously sounds wonderful. Again, I will use these terms often too when thinking about myself and in giving advice. They sound wonderful, of course, because by definition, if we follow this way of thinking, it means we can live life on our terms in the most exciting ways that play to who we are and what generates true excitement from us, where again, our passions lie. All wonderful. Here's the danger. Note what we are at least in danger of saying when we use this terminology. Again, I'm not saying get rid of the terminology, but here's the dangerous underside I want to say a few words about. It implies there already is, at a very young age, a true self there, a set of passions there that we not only can, but the implication is must find pretty early on in life, because if we find them early on in life, then we can do the extraordinary work, meaning that we will, for example, hit a college or university already knowing who we are, already knowing what our passions are, already able to throw ourselves into our major, do extracurricular activities that will play into those passions and forge us toward this extraordinary career. It also assumes there's a coherent world out there that we can fit ourselves into. In other words, once we found our passions at a, again, hopefully young age, we will fit ourselves into this world because I am a person like X, I have this personality, I have these passions, it will lead to this career, and that career is, and we look at the world and see what the career options are. Again, it sounds at one level wonderful, but you're already probably getting a sense of why I'm talking about a dangerous underside. And now let me lay that out explicitly. And I will lay it out explicitly by bringing in another body of terminology from a field I happen to find very exciting, namely Chinese philosophy. That, again, won't contradict this, but it will add a different dimension. So here's another way of thinking about the self. Maybe we don't, at a very young age, say high school, to give a not random example, already have this clear, true self with a clear set of passions that, boy, you better find pretty quickly to guide you correctly into college and a future career. Maybe we do, by the way, but we're probably not going to be able to find it at too young an age. And maybe the word "it" is not the proper way of thinking about it at all anyway. So let me lay out that alternate vision of the self. What if what we really are at birth is a mess? We're a mess of different energies, emotions, dispositions, faculties, the fact that we can see and hear and we have a brain, so we're capable of thinking. We're a mess. And part of what we become from a very young age is, as a mess, we interact with other messes. Let's call them human beings. And when we interact with other messes, we drag out from each other different energies. And as we do so, also again from a very young age, we fall into patterns of interaction, patterns that kind of define how we interact, how we see the world, how we don't see the world, how we build relationships. They form what we perhaps dangerously will call our personality. I may think, oh, I'm someone who loves X, Y, and Z, but I have these following dangerous tendencies. I have a bad temper, or whatever it is we may think we have, all of which may be empirically perfectly true, but it may tell you much more about patterns you've fallen into than some true self that you already have. And if there's anything to this, the argument will continue. The last thing you want to do is tell yourself, I should love and embrace myself for who I am on this true self I think I've already found at this young age, because it's just me. What if, on the contrary, you say, what I currently am is a bunch of patterns. Some of these may be wonderful patterns. Some of them may be dramatically limiting my potential, dramatically limiting how I see the world. And to alter patterns, what you do is you train yourself. You train yourself to refine your abilities to literally see the world, interact with other people, not by rote patterns, but interacting with people in terms of their complexity, their messiness. You learn to break your perspectives in terms of how you see the world. We tend to view it from our own perspective by definition. That's not pre-given. You can train yourself not to do it. Putting it in strong terms, what you're doing is you're thinking about building a life the same way we would think about things like learning a musical instrument, learning a sport, things where we know we have to spend hours and hours training ourselves in basic skills to do it well. Like if you're learning a piano, you spend years training yourself how to move your fingers early on, then training yourself to sense the feeling of the music, sense how as you play slightly differently, it brings out different sounds, sensing how those sounds affect those around you. If you're playing in an ensemble, you're learning to sense the resonance with other players while also affecting the audience. And that's training. We don't do that naturally. Well, what if we thought about our lives this way? Not just we're training ourselves to learn a piano, but we're training ourselves to see the world. We're training ourselves to interact better. We are, getting back to the heart of our discussion, training ourselves to embark on journeys and paths, knowing that there's always a danger we will fall into a pattern that will lock us in and narrow down our choices, narrow down who we think we are, and narrow down our possibilities, even close doors to possibilities going forward. Let me give a concrete example, which I'm embarrassed to say is, well, me. An example of someone who fell into exactly what I am talking about. So when I was your age, when I was in high school, I thought I had found my passion. And it's not even that I think in retrospect I hadn't. I found something I love and still love. So my love was reading the classics of Europe. So I loved European philosophy, European literature. I loved learning European languages, and I truly did love it and actively still love it. It was indeed a body of passions. And early on, because I was throwing myself into it, I was training myself, in other words, to use a different terminology, well, started becoming pretty good at it. And professors were very supportive of me. It directed me in terms of where I went to a university, a place where I could really focus on European philosophy literature. It focused my major. I became a philosophy major and an intellectual history major, a double concentrator, all to do this. It decided, and now you can see a terminology shift, it decided for me what I was going to continue to do. I was, of course, going to get a PhD in this field and become a teacher in this field because it's what I've been doing. I'm becoming, decently good at it. I applied to graduate schools. And when I got in, was deciding where to go. And literally with the clock ticking at the last minute, when I had to make the decision of which graduate school to go to do this, I could not decide. And as the clock kept ticking closer to the deadline, I realized the reason I couldn't decide is that also, beginning, by the way, in high school, I had started reading a lot of material outside of Europe, a ton from India, a ton from China, and at a deep level, I'd constantly be saying, why don't I start studying Chinese and Sanskrit? And I kept thinking, no, that's silly, it's impractical. I devoted so much time to learning European languages. That's what I should continue doing. And luckily, in retrospect, literally as that deadline was in the last few minutes, I decided, no, I can't decide because this isn't what I want to do. I love it, but I want to learn Chinese. And I shifted gears. Yes, it was a ton of work, but if you're doing something you love, it's wonderful work. And I threw myself into a completely different career, luckily. But I constantly look back and think, what if I had not done that? I would have thought correctly, I was following passions, which I was. I love this material. I still do. Correctly thinking I was finding something I was pretty good at, correctly. And right now, I would have had extraordinary regrets that I had not listened to that little voice that I kept pushing aside. Putting this back into the way of thinking I was just mentioning, we're complex creatures, and we can find something that extraordinarily excites us correctly, but then we can fall into a pattern. And in that pattern, it can narrow us down. We'll think, this is me. I just am X. This is what I love. This is what I'm going to continue doing. The implication being the scary side, don't do anything else because you found it. And here's my advice. Know that for a fact, we as humans are always in danger of falling into patterns. Again, not all patterns are bad, but they can become bad if they become ruts that we just become good at staying in and become comfortable in staying in. And always train yourself to be open to the world around you. When you find something you love, I did, great. But keep training yourself to look at other possibilities too. Actively train yourself when you're working on even one specific research project to look at other perspectives, ask other questions you're not posing, and with larger trajectories, actively do things that you think kind of push your comfort zone, take you outside of what you think is your true self or your true passions. They may not be exciting roads to go down, but until you try a little bit, you won't know. And if there's some voice in there saying, should I think of something else? Listen to that voice, try it a little bit, and see if you can open up a bit. If you do so, what you will do is find doors are opening around you constantly. An extraordinary journey, or now also use the plural, set of journeys await you. And that, I would argue, is a way to think both of an immediate research plan and the grander journey of life. Constantly be training yourself to open up, see other doors, see other possibilities, see that the world is not coherent, nor are you. It's a mess. You're a mess in a good way. And what we become and what we do with the world depends on how we train ourselves, how we work with the world. And if you think that way, yes, I think you will have an extraordinary journey. You will find your interests, but then find isn't really the verb anymore. You will be actively generating sets of interests and helping to, in a sense, generate a world within which those interests and even those around you can truly flourish. So thank you so much. It has been such an honor being here with you. I very much look forward first to some questions and answers, and very much look forward to the presentations to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was a wonderful speech, and we have a bunch of questions for you. So in the interest of time, I'm going to dive right in.
Please.
So the first question that we received was, how can one avoid falling into the limiting patterns that we create to help us determine who we are?
Perfect question. And the good news, which will sound like bad news, but bear with me for a couple of sentences, is you won't. So you're going to fall into them. Now, that sounds like an absurdly pessimistic way of putting it, but here's why I'm saying it's ultimately a good thing. Know that we, of course, will, right? You will. You will fall into patterns. They often may seem to be, and often in some ways will be, good patterns where you're very, very comfortably doing things that are great for you. Constantly ask yourself, yes, but am I thinking I'm flourishing in these patterns? I'll use the word again, because I've trained myself to be good within them, but they're becoming limiting. Or is it really opening up a journey that I really want to be on? You will not know that unless you're constantly asking different questions, shifting your perspective, actively doing other sorts of things. And if you're doing that constantly, just build that into your life, then you will be able to answer that question. You'll see, when are you in a pattern that's closing off possibilities, and when, on the contrary, are you actively opening them up? So thank you. Perfect question.
Wonderful. Well, so the next question we have is, knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently in high school?
Yes, wonderful question too. My huge mistake is when I started reading texts from China and India, what I really should have done back then, 10th grade, is I should have actively started exploring them. Now, I was growing up in Nashville, Tennessee. Learning Sanskrit and classical Chinese was not an easy option. So I might not have been able to literally have done that then, although luckily the world has changed at least a bit since then. So it's more possible to do that sort of thing. But even then, could I have started actively doing so? Could I have checked out books on Chinese and begun doing it? Could I have started hiring tutors? Of course I could have done it. And once I started doing that, had I done it, within, I bet, 2 weeks, I would have realized, of course, yes, I love classical Greek, I love French and German, I love classical Chinese too. And I would have actively started doing that. And then I would have gone to college, doing it along with the European stuff I was doing, which I also loved. I wouldn't have faced that incredibly dangerous moment where I almost didn't do it before graduate school. And I think I've lived an okay life since then, but nonetheless, I often look back at how much more I could have done and how much less risky it would have been at that moment, my senior year of college, had I done what you were asking, just simply begun actively listening to other sides of myself that I kept closing off.
Yeah, that's something that I had an experience with as well. And it seems like we have a question that's kind of related to that moment that you described in 10th grade. A student asks, so what advice would you give us applying to colleges for undergrad who feel pressure to decide upon a major while applying if they still want to explore 3 to 4 interests that they have?
Wonderful question. And I'll again give myself as the negative example. So it's so embarrassing to admit in retrospect, I literally chose my college looking for the place where I could study continental philosophy, which is a certain brand of philosophy, not often taught in America at the time. And literally, that's how I chose college. I say that to say that's what you should not do. What you are looking at for a college or a university is a place where you can flourish, telling yourself you don't know specifically what you are going to be majoring in. You may, exactly as in your question, have at least 3 or 4 interests. You may frankly find in the next year or two, you'll have more. And you might find once you get to college, it will even proliferate. Great. And you want to be in a place that will encourage that. You want to be in a place that will not expect you freshman year to already know what you're going to do and only be allowed to do that, period. You want to be in a place where you can grow. And then the next piece of this is when you get there, actively do it. Start taking courses outside of your comfort zone. Do extracurricular activities outside of your comfort zone. Use those college years to explore your interests. If you end up doing exactly what you think right now you're interested in, fine. If you don't, and I suspect you won't, it might be one of those 3 or 4 things that might be something else altogether. Wonderful. So first, choose a college that will allow you to explore, and then in college, absolutely explore.
Wonderful advice. So this is also related in terms of college and postgraduate opportunities, but a lot of high schoolers feel like they can only choose between a few professions: law, medicine, engineering. Obviously, you took an alternate path with philosophy, but how do we inspire young students to think beyond these traditional paths? And is there a way to get rid of some stereotypes that some paths are more prestigious than others?
Yes, great question. And going back to, and I'm sure it's have like an odd way of phrasing it, but I'll return to it. When I was saying we tend to assume there's this kind of coherent world, right? So I'm coherent, and how do I fit into that coherent world? Meaning there's kind of an unchanging world out there with a few pre-given paths in which I could succeed, and even fewer ones in which I could succeed given who I am. If we're going to break down the I am part, as we were mentioning, we need to break down that view of the world too. So the world changes in wonderful ways and in horrible ways. You're welcome to the rest of your lives. But the exciting part of that is it is a mess. And there is no way to know what is going to be exploding. I can tell you when I was in high school, I mean, no one would have thought that AI was a extraordinary future. And kabam, I mean, the world changed dramatically. We don't know what is going to be extraordinary in terms of the world to come. And knowing that we don't know that, think of this as a period to train yourself, explore these interests in this broad way of thinking, and that may take you in careers you have literally never heard of right now. It also could take you into a career that was just mentioned, but you would completely rethink it. So you might think, okay, I will be an engineer, but rethinking the self, how would I rethink the way algorithms and AI are working? How would I write different types of programming that would rethink our assumptions of the self, that would open up possibilities instead of locking ourselves into a world where we're always getting the same news stories from who we are defined by the algorithm to be. So even within these fields, there's a messiness that if we're training ourselves to rethink everything, even those fields themselves, you can change if you go into them. So think of not just these few fields, think of it as a messy world out there that you're going to be not only entering, but actively changing by seeing these possibilities. And even in a one field you end up becoming a member of, that's something you'll be changing and rethinking actively, which will only be possible if you spend these next several years training yourself to be able to do so.
Totally. Thank you for that, Michael. So I know that we are a few minutes over time, so this will be the last question. And thank you all for submitting your wonderful questions. But the last question is, What advice do you have to young students and their parents who have absolutely no idea what their passions are?
And ironically, you may be in the best position. One of the most dangerous ones is where I was, where I did find something I loved, but then got overly locked into it. In some ways, you're in the better position because you don't know. And there, the key is keep exploring and simply avoid the danger of thinking, because you will get this, of thinking, okay, I need to decide soon. So anything I find that seems even slightly interesting, I should just jump into that and say, this is me, these are my passions, this will define my career. Actively avoid doing that. If you don't yet know what you want to do, wonderful. I hope come 3 or 4 years from now, you still won't. And I really mean that. And keep exploring. Even if you think you found something, great. Means keep exploring. Don't allow doors to be closed to you. And honestly, think of this as a wonderful position to be in, and one that hopefully you'll continue to be in for several years. Don't allow the pressures of society to lock you into one path too early. And so it's wonderful you're not locked in yet.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so, so much, Michael. This was a wonderful keynote speech. I know I enjoyed it, and I'm sure everyone else who is here enjoyed it. So we thank you so much. We do have some questions that were not answered live. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to record them, and I'll email you, Michael, all of the questions, and then we can share it out with everyone who was here. So everyone will ultimately get their question answered. But in the meantime, thank you again. And please continue exploring all of the wonderful projects we have being presented today. We really appreciate you and your time.
Great. Well, thank you, Victoria, and thank you, all the scholars and parents. This has been so inspiring, and I very much look forward to the rest of the day. Thank you.
Wonderful. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Okay, I'm going to hop off. Thank you so much again, and I'll send you those questions afterwards.
Please do, and thank you so much. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you, and you did, as always, just such an amazing job. Thank you.
As did you. Okay, I am off to go moderate a session, but
absolutely.
I will talk to you later. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and I will be hopping through sessions, and I'm sure I'll be hopping through yours as well. See you very soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.